Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our annual meeting, the annual meeting of the stockholders of Applied DNA Sciences. I'm Jim Hayward, the Chairman, President, and CEO of the company, and I'll act as chair of today's meeting. I'd like to introduce you to the directors and members of the management team who are present with us at the meeting today. We're pleased to have with us the following directors of the company. If you could just stand briefly, that's John Bitzer, the third. Joseph Ciccoli. Charles Ryan. And Sanford Simon. And unfortunately, Yaakov Shamash could not be with us today. We're pleased also to have with us members of the executive team. That's Beth Jansen, our CFO. Ben Liang, our secretary and chief scientist. Judy Murrah, our CIO. Debbie Bailey, our irrepressible executive director of investor relations. John Shearman. Bob McDowell, Bob Miglani, Katie Palomar, Larry Kick, Jesse Hayward, Mike Provenzano, Tom Gladkey, Tom Ackerman, John Davis, and Nicole Gallaudet. Richard Cook of Markham, LLP, our independent certified public accountants, are here, along with Merrill Cranes of Pepper Hamilton, our legal counsel. So with this, the meeting will please come to order. Christian Nolan, a representative of Broadridge Financial Solutions, will serve as the inspector of elections for this meeting with the authority, among other things, to receive and determine the validity of all proxies and ballots submitted and to certify the number of shares represented at this meeting and the results of the vote for the company's stockholders on any motion. Ms. Debbie Bailey will act as secretary of the meeting, and I'll now turn the floor over to her.
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me? Mr. Nolan has taken and signed an oath to faithfully execute the duties of the inspector of elections. With strict impartiality and according to the best of his ability. The floor recognizes Mr. Nolan.
I present the affidavit of Broadridge Financial Services, the company's mailing and tabulating agent, with respect to the due mailing of the notice of internet availability of proxy materials to stockholders of the company, as well as the due mailing and the notice of the meeting, the proxy statement, and the form of proxy of those stockholders requesting it. I also present a list of the holders of the company's common stock as of the close of business on April 11, 2016. The record date for this meeting is prepared by the American Stock Transfer and Trust Company.
The affidavits, proxy materials, and list of stockholders are directed to be filed with the records of the company. If they have not already done so, will all of those present who are stockholders or duly appointed representatives of stockholders please report their presence to Mr. Nolan and give any proxies or substitutions of proxies which they may have, together with a statement of the number of shares owned or represented by them. Stockholders present may vote in person if they wish after they have reported their presence to Mr. Nolan and revoked any proxy they may have already given. Is there anybody here that wants to do that?
The registrar has computed the number of shares representing under the official form of proxies made available or sent to stockholders, to which I've added the number of shares present in person at this meeting. I report that the holders of at least 19,962,983 shares of the common stock are represented at the meeting, whose shares represent approximately 82.9% of the shares entitled to vote at this meeting.
A quorum is therefore present and the meeting is properly constituted for the transaction of business. The proxies and any substitutions of proxies presented to the meeting are hereby ordered filed with the records of the company. As set forth in the notice sent to each of the stockholders of the company, the business of this meeting includes the election of 6 persons to the board of directors of the company as presented in Proposal 1 of the proxy statement. The approval on a non-binding advisory basis of the compensation of the company's named executive officers as presented in Proposal 2 in the proxy statement, and the ratification of the appointment of Markham LLP as the company's independent registered public accounting firm for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2016, as presented in Proposal 3 in the proxy statement. Okay, we already distributed ballots, so we'll put it there. In order to avoid any confusion, let me take a few moments to outline the format for today's meeting. A vote will now be taken whether to approve each proposal. Once the votes on the proposals have been tallied, the results with respect to each proposal will be announced. After any other business that may properly come before the meeting has been transacted, the formal portion of the meeting will be adjourned, and Dr. Hayward will give a presentation on the operations of the company. Okay, so I think the polls are now closed with respect to proposals?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Nolan, would you please report on the votes taken with respect to proposal number 1, the election of directors of the company?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to advise the meeting that with respect to proposal number 1, Debbie Bailey is appointed in the official proxy card as voted in accordance with the proxies received from stockholders. I report that the nominees who received the highest numbers of affirmative votes for the shares present in person or represented by proxy and entitled to vote, a quorum being present, are James A. Hayward, John Bitzer III, Joseph Ciccoli, my apologies, sorry, Charles Ryan, Yakov Shamash, and Sanford R. Simon.
Misters Hayward, Bitzer, Ciccoli, Ryan, and Shamash and Simon have each been elected as directors of the company. Mr. Nolan, would you please report on the vote taken with respect to proposal number 2, the approval on a non-binding advisory basis of the compensation of the company's named executive officers?
I would like to advise the meeting that Ms. Bailey has voted in accordance with the proxies received from the stockholders. 7,369,795 votes have been cast in favor of proposal number 2. 939,351 votes have been cast against it, and 156,778 votes have abstained. With respect to proposal number 2, a majority of the outstanding shares of common stock present in person or represented by proxy at the annual meeting have been cast in favor of the proposal and is hereby approved.
Proposal number 2 is adopted. Mr. Nolan, would you please report on the vote taken with respect to proposal number 3, the ratification of the appointment of Markham LLP as the company's independent registered public accounting firm for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2016?
I would like to advise the meeting that Ms. Bailey has voted in accordance with the proxies received from stockholders. 19,799,350 shares have been cast in favor of proposal number 3. 105,653 votes have been cast against it, and 58,980 votes have abstained. With respect to proposal number 3, a majority of the outstanding shares of common stock present or represented at the meeting have been cast in favor by the proposal, and the Board of Directors' selection of Markham LLP is hereby ratified.
Proposal number 3 is adopted. I will now return the floor to Dr. Hayward.
So the chair will now entertain a motion for adjournment of the meeting.
So moved.
Seconded? Anybody? Okay, well done. All those in favor of the motion, please signify their assent by saying aye. All those opposed? Aye. Aye. Thank you for listening through the legal formalities of the meeting, and now it's my pleasure to give you a brief presentation, after which I'd be happy to entertain any questions. I would also urge you to visit each of the stations around the room and talk to the staff. Some just newly minted, just arrived, like Bob McLovey in the back, representing our efforts in pharma. But there's much to be gained by an informal chat, and so I recommend it highly. So our company now is positioned really with the wind at our backs, and our opportunities for growth are very, very strong. But growth is rarely linear. It has its peaks, it has its valleys. We are experiencing our first year really with seasonality influencing our numbers. But that said, we're in a wonderful spot. And in terms of the globe, both our societal and economic future relies on identifications or definitions of identity. And our company, Applied DNA Sciences, has really refined what trusted identity really means. And it does so using the authenticity of DNA, the system that biology created for identity. Our convergence of biotech and information technologies enable DNA-based security solutions to answer the formidable macroeconomic and geopolitical challenges of our day and our future. Just consider the following scenarios with regard to identity. Trust me, this will cure your malaria. Or, if you're in the US, trust me, this is Viagra. Or with reference to origin, trust me, this is Italian. Or claims, trust me, this was organically grown. Or composition, trust me, this is 100% Pima cotton. Or ethical sourcing, trust me, no child labor or adult slaves helped to produce this product. To support a sustainable planet, trust me, this was farmed using sustainable methods. Or in anti-terror, trust me, I just want to fertilize the farm. Or in cybersecurity, trust me, there is no malware on this chip. Or in document security, trust me, the paper trail is solid gold. Or in law enforcement, how did this DNA get on me? And we addressed all of those issues. Now, our signature DNA is our flagship product. It's biotanically or botanically derived. It's engineered. And the DNA sequence can form multiple invariant molecules. The variability is essentially infinite, and we can manufacture the product in essentially infinite quantity. And our acquisition of Vandalia last year certainly helped that along. It's typically embedded or becomes part of a carrier that stays with the DNA on the product throughout its life cycle. Some of our more common carriers you'll see around the room, they're things like ink or plastic or adhesive or cotton fiber. or any one of a variety of formats. In fact, to my knowledge, we've not really encountered a carrier format, a formulation we've been asked to achieve that we couldn't achieve. When checked against a database, the environment attributes an update with such indicators as time, geolocation stamps, authenticator, and other relevant characteristics captured from a physical object and the transaction. And much like blockchains, which occupy an awful lot of airtime, each authentication adds value to the item's identity by reinforcing its authenticity and traceability. Botanically derived DNA as information carriers supported by the mobile detectors you see around the room and the integrated IT systems really are a transformational solution on a global scale. The DNA tags have only content, no functionality, and moreover, in a red team challenge orchestrated by DoD, we were able to prove that our marks simply cannot be copied. There is nothing in the marketplace that comes close to the position we have. And there are few in the marketplace have anything like the momentum we have in marching to commerce as we are. Now, here is our technical ecosystem. Again, signature DNA as the flagship in the middle. But it is surrounded by the methods we use to either screen for the presence of DNA rapidly in the field in a non-forensic way, or to examine for that DNA forensically in the field in a very much forensic way, or to do the traditional lab work that typically takes on the order of the day in the lab as well. So that is our core platform. And if there are any elements of that core platform, they're actually demonstrated around the room as well. So you'll have the opportunity to see them in greater detail. Now, we've made great progress in the field of cotton in this last year. And we have developed essentially 2 platforms. We are working on a third. But those 2 platforms are genotyping, which utilizes the DNA that is present already in a natural material or in a natural commodity like cotton. And then we have our engineered flagship platform, Signature T. So we utilized our genotyping to check on the transparency and honesty of the cotton industry twice in the last few years, once in 2009 and repeated again this year. The results were nearly identical, meaning the industry hasn't changed much, and probably indicating that the practices in the industry are decades old. And for that reason, we really think that cotton is a superb example for anyone to understand about the power of what we can do. And that as supply chains go, nothing could be harder or worse than cotton. Because the fact is, cotton visits after it's been processed anywhere from 7 to 12 countries offshore. Each process is transformational and provides an opportunity to cheat, to add something in that you didn't ask for, or to leave something out that you did ask for. And believe me, it seems to happen at every stop. And it's an industry in which cheating really has been inculcated. And the reason why is because of the way the US economy and the European economy has grown. With the big box store, they can put enormous pressure on the supply chain, say we want more and we won't pay for it. And so the manufacturers then have to sort out, well, where do they get the margin that they just lost? And they get that margin, unfortunately, by cheating. And we've gone back historically to Smithsonian Institute textiles. And we can see that the cheating has been going on for really some time. So what I'm presenting to you is just the first technology, which is genotyping, and what the results tell us. So from a large survey of Pima products, in this case we were dealing with one kind of cotton. That cotton is Pima. It's the most expensive cotton grown in the United States. Only about 300 million pounds of Pima are grown in the US. It's a much more superior quality fiber. It holds the color better. It's a much longer fiber. It's stronger. It holds up better. It wears better. And so in expensive sheets and shirts, that's the fiber typically you want to look for. But it's rare on a relative basis. Only 300 million pounds in the United States. And so we looked at textiles, finished goods, that claim to be 100% Pima. And there is a federal law that guides it. If you say you're 100% Pima, there is no forgiveness. You can't be 99.9. You have to be 100% Pima. And when we looked, 83% were not 100% Pima. But instead, only 17% were pure Pima. Most were blends, and some didn't even have a trace of Pima cotton in it. And that's overall. If you break it out into apparel, 88% was not Pima. And in fact, 19% had not a trace. And if you look at home textiles, you had 20% Pima and 45% without a trace of the product it claims to be. So we developed the method of DNA marking at the gin, which is right where the cotton is picked. So we're not marking in the field, but we sure couldn't be too much closer. And we have gradually gone from a single gin last year, or 2 years ago, to 3 gins in California this last year. And that is a reflection of the capacity that we grew to mark DNA. So we marked 5 million pounds the first year. We provided DNA adequate to mark 100 million pounds last year, I believe in 1 year. Sorry. Now, what that did was allow the consumer now, for the very first time, to have confidence, and I think we have a couple of 100% Pima products around the place. And when we had those evaluated by university textile experts and industry textile experts, the response was the same. They'd never seen anything like it. In fact, we've come to the conclusion we don't think a 100% Pima product has been shipped to the United States in 30 years. Excuse me. And the people we're working with, we're now working with more than Costco, have reported a substantial increase in sales of this product as a consequence of the purity of the product as well. Now, that claim that I addressed with you relates only to composition and quality. But there are other claims that Americans concern themselves with. Like, did it come from whoops, was it grown in America? And there are companies like Walmart who dedicated over 10 years a $250 billion campaign to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and that includes growing back to the United States. So companies definitely have an interest in the "this was made in America" claim, and I can tell you, because I've been traveling the global textile industry, that American products have risen in their appreciation globally. There's another reason: sustainability. Sustainability is an issue that will be with us for decades to come because of global climate change. And American cotton is the most sustainable, the least use of water, fertilizer per yield of cotton. So if you have an interest in sustaining the planet, American cotton makes great sense. How do you prove it's American cotton, especially if the production is done offshore? There's only one way that I know of, and it's ours. There's another very important issue, and that is, how is cotton grown the world over? We grow cotton and harvest it mechanically with machines. It's efficient and does not utilize children or forced labor, slaves. There are 13 countries across the world who do just that, starting with Uzbekistan, that has the worst reputation in that regard. Now, 240 companies have signed a pledge never to use that cotton, nor any of the other 12 countries that grow cotton that way. They've pledged not to. They're going to try their best. But with what? A paper document that says from the supplier, I didn't use any Uzbeki cotton? I can tell you that I just visited, I won't say where, a very reputable manufacturer, and we learned that that manufacturer was a proud user of Uzbeki cotton. And we saw the Uzbeki cotton in their warehouse when we inspected it. So we were left with no doubt. But the companies they manufacture represented some of the top 10 of the pledge signers. So there aren't too many ways of enforcing the notion of ethical sourcing, which is really what we're talking about. And DNA provides perhaps the best method. And if it comes to court, DNA would also provide the kind of expert witness document that would be necessary to support your claims. Now we just, my guest in the front chair, nobody knows it, but I named her Cynthia. That's after Craig Venter, who did the same thing when he synthesized a genome for a bacterium. But Cynthia is a synthetic fiber made from polyester, and just yesterday we announced our entry into that marketplace where we can DNA mark synthetic fibers. The reason this is important is that combined, all of the cottons grown all over the world represent 25% or less of the global textile industry. More than 60% is represented by Cynthia and her kind. And we have been able to authenticate fully throughout the supply chain. In fact, it's easier than cotton. And we expect and are hopeful, fingers crossed, to see this business grow in a fashion similar, to what we did in cotton. We mentioned that our first outing was to mark 5 million pounds, and that our intention is to mark many millions of pounds. If you think back to cotton, we went from 5 to 100 to whatever we do this year. Excuse me. Okay, pharmaceutics. Very important issue. And one way to look at pharmaceutics is, I'm sure many of you have invested in biotech companies based on the disease entity they have decided to pursue. And if you have a belief that their science will have an impact on that disease entity, you buy the shares. Well, very few people regard counterfeit drugs as a disease entity. They see it as an enforcement issue. But we see it a slightly different way, because many, many people die from exposure to counterfeit drugs. There was just a 2013 Interpol study that said, these facts will shock you, that up to 30% of the drugs sold globally are counterfeit. That up to 10% of the drugs sold legally in the United States, up to 10, maybe less, are counterfeit in America. That up to 50% of online sales are counterfeit, that's probably no surprise. Sorry. The second killer globally, these numbers are from the World Health Organization's 2015 study, is cancer. You'd be surprised to know that many of the counterfeited drugs are anti-cancer drugs, and that they have an impact as a consequence, not just on mortality, but an enormous impact on the morbidity of patients undergoing cancer therapy. If you consider the third position, HIV/AIDS, which, thank God, has been steadily diminishing. But in 2013, the death rate was 1.2 million across the globe. HIV drugs are up there in the counterfeit drug category as well. It worsens every year. And I don't see how you contemplate morbidity. The mortality is right in front of you. And what's the impact on healthcare costs? Counterfeit drugs are the fourth killer. And we see it as an undiagnosed disease. One that deserves the FDA's attention, the CDC's attention. It has the WHO attention. But there's little action really being taken in the industry that has the potential to eradicate counterfeit drugs. We're in a position to do something really very, very meaningful. You'd be surprised to know that the picture on the right is actually a Chinese custom guard climbing down a hill of counterfeit drugs seized in Guangzhou. So we have reason, really, as a community, to consider the counterfeit drug issue quite closely. In Setauket here, some of you may know the story of Timothy Fagan, who 15 years ago was given counterfeit erythropoietin in the midst of recovering from a liver transplant at age 16. And the erythropoietin was counterfeit. And in fact, it was counterfeit and non-sterile. And in fact, it was just water in an identical tap water, in an identical vial. And that incident actually had a personal impact on me, a story I've really told very, very few. But my son, my older son, was due for a surgery in Florida. And so or actually in New York, but we took him to Florida, to Disney, to enjoy the last couple of days because we knew he was having his spine fused from top to bottom. So he would need lots of blood. So we agreed to be part of the erythropoietin trial and to have it shipped to Disney so that when I arrived, I could give him the injections, and a few days before the surgery, he could build up his red cell counts. It was a great plan. And so I called the front desk and said, could you please bring over the vial? They said right away. Just give me a few minutes and I'll get the hand truck. That was my first warning. And what came to my room were 5 cases of 100 vials of erythropoietin. My guess is one of those vials legitimate had to have a value of $10,000 easily. So we realized this was a mistake. We were not going to participate. We backed off, shipped it all back to Origin, reported it, and we knew nothing of Timothy Fagan, who received the same drug. And only when I joined this company 5 years later did I hear of Timothy Fagan's plight. That probably came from the same law. So it's more prevalent than you might think. It might touch members of the audience. And certainly related to pharmaceutics is personal care. The FDA regulates drugs, over-the-counter drugs, food, and personal care products, and to some extent supplements as well. And so we have recently hired an industry thought leader in the same spirit as asking Bob to join us, Dr. Barbara Brockway, who is the past president of the Society of Chemical Scientists, Cosmetic Scientists for Europe, to join us to help lead our entry into that arena. Now, there have been some who have been critical about the number of industry verticals that we're entering and how much can we pursue at the same time. And believe me, we worry about it because our bandwidth is limited, and we only have so many people and so much money in reserve. But we see these as very closely intertwined, and that personal care may have a lower barrier to entry, and we're looking forward to making progress in both of those categories this year. People often ask us about our progress in MilGov, or military government. We're pleased to say that we had a very successful two-year contracts. They totaled $4 million. They were announced actually at this platform 2 years ago. And those platforms were dedicated to the commercialization, not to the development, of a single authentication strategy to be used across the DoD board. And we started our work with DoD, with DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, in the marking of high-risk semiconductors. And that business has continued to move along very nicely. In fact, we asked for it to be consolidated at DLA because we were marking at one stage with as many as 31 different manufacturers, and the inefficiencies were killing a small company. So it was concentrated at DLA. We marked there that business has sustained, despite word out in the ether that that business was declining. The dollars were declining because we asked it to. It was more efficient business for us. But meanwhile, those two contracts asked us to move from a single federal supply class of these high-risk semiconductors to an incremental 65 federal supply classes. Those federal supply classes represent purchases not of 100,000 chips a year, as FSC 5962 does, but of 146 million purchases a year by DLA, all considered at risk. And the total value of that purchasing is between 20 and $21 billion. Now, we were very successful in developing the commercial methods necessary for potential partners to scale up the production of DNA-marked materials asked for in that list of 65 FSCs. We have formed some wonderful initial partnerships. We've announced a few, haven't announced most of them. The few we've announced has been SAS, that does extruded silaster components, things like waveguides for microwave guides, gaskets and materials like that. We're working in a number of interesting areas, so many that I want to be careful I don't mention the wrong one, find out it wasn't in the press and Debbie will kill me before the meeting. So that commercialization effort is moving nicely, and it's moving toward a much broader, much bigger market. At the same time, we have continued to penetrate through the federal government, entering more and more agencies, and in fact, several of those agencies are acting as our marketing arm and spreading the word very effectively. So we're very pleased at our progress in MilGov. And related to that, of course, is the production of commercial and industrial materials like car parts, which are also one of the FSCs, but is a wonderful opportunity commercially anyway. And you recognize that we have formed a relationship for the DNA marking of a high-end luxury car as it moves from one country in Europe into Scandinavia. And that business is doing quite well too. You know what, Judy, I think we're going to skip these. Yeah. And for some of the IT issues, if anybody would like to hear about them afterward, I'm happy to talk about them, but I think this is going on pretty long already, and I'll get to towards wrapping up. Our DNA Net product has done very well in Europe. And remember, this is an asset marking product. Comes in a very small volume. And it's being used to mark cars. It's being used a bit in the military. And it's being used to mark the content of homes. And you can see we have marked over 1 million items so far. We've sold over 25,000 units. We're very hopeful of bringing this business to the United States. And we have a superb director of sales who has a PhD in IT technology and who himself wrote the software used by many police departments to track the amount of crime in their districts. So he's a known entity. He has done a remarkable job of establishing the framework, building it from the ground up to support DNA net sales. So, like a Napoleon March, he's moved from eastern Long Island in a straight path all the way to western Pennsylvania, with the support of every police department in between. And support is an inadequate word. Excuse me, it's joyful. The police departments are very much behind it. With that framework in place, we believe we will be able to build the business we expected in the first place. Excuse me. Okay, with that, I'd like to kind of end my comments. Happy to talk more. And I thought to kind of help the questioning that we could do them by groups. And you can ask any questions you might have in a particular area. One might trigger another. So I'd like to start, if we can, with our basic platform, if anybody has any questions.
I'll ask a question.
Sure.
The genotyping that you do, is there anything proprietary about that, or is that just anyone can do that? Is there anything specific that's different than the way you guys do it?
Sure. Yes, we have several patents. We've just completed or just been given our third patent in the genotyping that we do. It is proprietary. It is quite different and ingenious, and took a special talent to be able to develop it. And the initial genotyping that we had was to discriminate between Pima and Upper. And we can do that quite well. And now we're really at the stage of scaling it up so that that can be run by robots and done automatically. We can have high volume testing. So we're very optimistic about that. However, we've now signed an agreement with USDA, who are charged globally with the need to maintain a germplasm library, as it's called. So they have cotton from every country that grows cotton in the world. And they collect the DNA from those cottons, they analyze those cottons, and in an agreement with us, we now have their data, and we have their samples. And we are developing the, hopefully, because this is true experimental science in this case, but it's fast. We are developing, we hope, the genotyping capability to be able to identify those countries that are on the verboten list, so that we can detect the unethically sourced cottons, like Uzbeki cotton, in any sample. So yes, we are in a very strong position. And we are defending that position as well against anybody we perceive as infringing. Any other kind of basic questions?
What is the enforcement of that, though? Find out they're using, Uzbeki cotton and all. Is there any way to enforce them so they stop using it, or do they sign agreements?
Well, one would imagine that the members who sign the pledge are well-intended. They're just not supported well by the supply chain that doesn't go through the trouble of testing. Just looks at a document, and the documents change. So we feel our first obligation is to tell who we consider the victim. The primary victim is really the consumer, but to tell the victim, hey, we found this problem. This is really how we built our Pima business now. We found a problem, and then we offered them. We kind of consider it as DX and RX, diagnosis and therapy. The diagnosis is, you got a problem. You're not using the cotton you thought you were. The therapy is, we can help you fix that.
Can we talk about the revenue side on textiles, how we make the money, and how in the supply chain, how we pay our bills?
So let's use that as, we'll drop off the first topic and move to textiles. Sure. Do you have a specific question, or would you like me to just tell you about our revenue model?
Please, it's new to me, so I'm just learning.
Sure, it's new to us too. So what happens is our customer right now is the merchant in the business. And there are multiple merchants, but one of the best known in the world is Louis Dreyfus. It was called Louis Dreyfus Commodities. More about that in a moment. What Dreyfus does is buy the cotton in the field, and in our case, then order the DNA to mark that cotton. We facilitate the marking of that cotton at the gin. Dreyfus bales it, inventories it, and waits for an order to ship it. We recognize the revenue when we ship the DNA, because Dreyfus takes possession, and they're free to use it. Now, that baled cotton could take as much as a year, maybe even 15 months before it ships. Because who uses that bale of cotton? Let's say a brand, our other partner is Himatsinka, who interfaces directly with the brands. Believe me, we do as well. I show up at as many of those meetings as I humanly can. And a brand, let's say it's Calvin Klein, says, we'd like to make a Pima product. We want to be sure that it's pure Pima, so we're going to use your Pima Cot, that's our trademark, technology with DNA. So Himatsinka informs Louis Dreyfus talks to Calvin Klein says, yes, this is how much we're going to use, here's the quantity of cotton we need. And everything gets DNA marked, baled, and stored. The next step in the process is that Calvin Klein's supply chain now has to get involved. Calvin Klein has been manufacturing product at specific places for years, and they have special relationships they want to endure. So their spinner calls Louis Dreyfus and says, I need 10,000 bales of cotton, it's 500 pounds a bale, delivered June 1st. Dreyfus signs the contract, delivers the bale of cotton, we get paid for the immediate shipment, and then we onboard the spinner. We train them how to handle DNA marked cotton, how to segregate it from the rest of what they have going on in the plant. We give them 2 6-inch binders of SOPs, videos, we train them, we tell them we'll be there unannounced in the future, and we implement a sampling program. They pay for the sampling program. And that's how the cotton moves through the first part of the supply chain. Then it moves from there to either a dyer, because now it's spun, it's on a yarn, on a comb, it's yarn. It's spun, and it's either going to go to a weaver or a knitter. It's either dyed or not dyed. It's either chemically treated or not chemically treated. Eventually, it becomes fabric. From fabric, it has to become finished goods. So it goes to a cut and sewer, then to a packager, and then finally back to the U.S. So maybe you can see why it could take 24 months from the day we DNA mark it until it arrives on a store shelf. Right? So we are just going through the first equilibrium of establishing those cycles. And they'll need to be established anew, we believe, in this next year as the volumes for cotton go up and as the moment of ordering changes a little bit. Last year, our orders were primarily from one announced customer, Costco, and another customer that we did not announce, but who now has product on their shelves. This year, we have more diversity than that.
DNA marker affected by extreme heat to make that process going from the original beginning of cotton to the
That's an excellent question. The question is, how does the extreme heat or even maybe the chemical processes, cotton gets beaten up pretty well before it becomes a fine shirt. Can DNA endure that process? And if you're a fan of Jurassic Park, you'll know that DNA can endure quite a lot under the right circumstances. And we took some lessons from paleontology. When DNA is treated properly chemically, if it's anhydrous without water, it's much more stable at high temperatures. If it's not exposed to certain pHs or certain chemicals or certain enzymes, it can be extremely stable. So the answer is yes, but we had to develop a number of patents to ensure that the DNA was stable by the end. In synthetic fibers, it's even better, because the DNA is just like in the amber in Jurassic Park. It's cocooned inside the synthetic fiber and not only on the outside as it is in cotton. Good question. Yes?
Jim, the question earlier on was about pricing, and I didn't hear the answer to that. When I see 100 million pounds of cotton, or I hear all the defense department, which is next on one of the contracts, only $4 million, what type of revenue are you generating all this marketing also that goes on? Yesterday you announced the synthetics as well. What type of pricing power do we have here? Is this relatively small in terms of, when I hear the Department of Defense, the contract is only $4 million, that's not terribly impressive. And what are we making on cotton when we're going to all of this 100 million pounds of bales for that from that? What is our pricing? What is the future of that?
Sure. Good, fair question, but I won't be able to answer all of it. We don't provide public pricing advice so that our competitors could take advantage of it, or so that we end up negotiating against ourselves in the next deal. I can tell you our margins are strong, and our pursuit of the business you have or seem to have in mind is what we have in mind. What we have in mind are multi-million-dollar contracts, multi-year contracts with reliability. You'll note that I provide no guidance. I'd like to, but I can't provide guidance on the basis of the kinds of contracts that don't provide me with certainty. I won't overpromise and underdeliver. So I get your question and feel the gap that you perceive exists in our strategy. I can tell you it doesn't, because we are pursuing these larger, for example, in defense, the real money comes from program contracts. But you're not awarded program contracts when you first knock on the DoD doors. You have to establish yourself credibly. You have to do initial contracts and deliver them. And we've been doing that very successfully. And actually, the $4 million contract was our highest contract we'd ever achieved up until then. We recently announced a blanket order, which is a single PO, really, for $2.5 million. That's a large placement for us at our stage. But what we do have in mind are double digits and long term.
If I follow up, first of all, you've got a strong board, and from Debbie Bailey's press release, some good team members, some quality people who join this firm, which as shareholders we appreciate and acknowledge and recognize. I said a couple of years ago, if you want to have a position, sometimes I throw several lines out into the water, which increases my odds of catching fish. You've got that all around this room. What does the board, or what does management feel? One of these, you have to basically pick one of these, and which one's going to be a home run. It may not be Pima Cotton, because I don't think there's any outrage in Walmart that it's not 100% Pima. I don't see the outrage. I thought this cloak item would be in every 7-Eleven across America by now. It's not. Which one of these is the board focusing enough on the revenue drivers? Where do you make the money with this? Is
Yeah.
the defense, is the government contracts, is it going to be in textiles now with the synthetics as well?
Right.
You know, the crime we see, we read all your press releases, we're up to speed on everything you're doing. It's all very, very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is going to drive revenue with this company?
Sure. A couple of aspects to that question. One is we have to be careful how many industry verticals we're in at any one time. We can't delude ourselves to the point of trying to boil the ocean. So we have to be focused, and it takes the wisdom of saying no occasionally. Right now, we're moving in the direction of those industry verticals that move the fastest and provide with that the highest dollar value to the company. Right now, that would have to be textiles because it's moving so fast. And your perception about the Pima market may be slightly skewed by Walmart, but I can tell you that it's very important in other sectors. But that said, it's a contained market. It's 300 million pounds. compared to 7 billion pounds of upland, where we can have a real impact. So we already feel we are bordering on a 30% market share of Piedmont. So it's time we focused on upland. Well, that's the blue jeans market and a variety of other markets, and believe me, that has our attention. So we feel that will continue to grow quite well. The same is true for our MilGov. The people leading that team have done a wonderful job of establishing themselves as credible partners to multiple offices in federal government. And as we broaden our reach, increase our depth, the size of those contracts, we believe, and their durability, their length, will increase. So those are the ones we're immediately focused on. We are especially attracted to pharma because we think we have a unique solution. Excuse me. And we believe we can save lives. We also believe that with regard to FDA, we're in a pretty good position. And our attorneys advise us that we are already FDA compliant. So when many people bring new technologies to FDA, they have a very long slope, big lag time. We don't think we will. Yes?
I had a question about if your products would be applicable to the luxury goods market. There was a big story last week about counterfeit perfumes where you think you're buying a luxury perfume and it's basically just garbage because it was counterfeit. Do you have any applications to the luxury goods market, like perfumes, handbags, and things of that nature?
Yes, and the answer is absolutely yes. What we have not wanted to do was divide ourselves too much by brand, but instead come up with solutions that can be adopted industry-wide. And that's the track we're taking. So we have not pursued the individual fragrance makers. Having been head of Estee Lauder's research department, I know that industry quite well. Barbara Brockway is just joining us, does as well. But we are looking for the bigger pipe.
What about
Wine is also an opportunity, but we can't do everything at once. And so we have consciously decided to hold wine off for a little while.
Getting back to FDA and pharma, and I can understand that you're in conversation with the FDA and even with pharmaceutical corporations, but what about the health insurance that covers all these drugs or doesn't cover them and wants to be sure that they get the right drug for the right price? Do you contact them? Do they contact you? Is that in the ballpark?
Yes, we are always chatting and in some cases forming relationships with thought leaders who could help sway an industry, especially when you have a disruptive platform, or a platform that's going to change the way things get done. So we are talking to thought leaders. We're not yet in conversation with those responsible for reimbursement because that's not really our bailiwick right now. But sure.
In the area of asset marking, do you have to have the cooperation of a police department before selling the individual kits to homeowners for marking? Is that an important preamble to having a widespread use of the asset marking?
It's best, but it's not essential. And so what we can do, and what Mike Mizik has done, is establish a training network with SMR, who train 12,000 police departments in the United States, and they have immediate access. So we found ourselves in that situation not too long ago, having had some sales we didn't ask for it in Idaho. And so we contacted SMR, we trained the police force that supported that sale, and now we know that if there's a crime related to that DNA net product, we can support it.
What about Suffolk County? What's the relationship with its department?
Well, Suffolk County is kind of in flux at the moment from one end to the other. We are quite active in Suffolk nonetheless, and you know that we have a program ongoing in Huntington Station. If you drive around Huntington Station now, you'll see signs erected saying this is a DNA protected community. That's our program. And about half of the intended number of recipients now have their DNA net, and they've used it and registered on our portal the materials that they've marked. So should they be stolen, taken to a pawn shop, or find themselves in the police station, we have a way of getting it back.
But not much in this area, this Stony Brook area?
Not as yet. Not as yet. I think things need to calm down just a bit. Excuse me.
As a consumer, how will people recognize the DNA branding on an item saying it's 100% FEMA? Will there be something from
Yes.
you saying we swear it's got a DNA?
Yes, so if you look, there are a couple of products on the back shelves from 2 retailers that have our brand and that indicate that we're behind it. But in addition, if you talk with Judy Murrah, she can walk you through our IT platform that I did not. And that IT platform includes a consumer-facing application. So, for example, we see the day not too far where you can go to a cotton product and look at where that product was made, actually see the farm where the fiber was sourced, read about the farm, and this is kind of the millennial drive, which is not going away, to know where your stuff comes from. And it's not just farm to table, but it relates to virtually everything. People want to know there are no conflict minerals, no conflict textiles included in any of their things. And we'll be able to support that.
The gentleman's question, you mentioned that if he goes to a pawn shop, if someone was to steal an item from someone's home, do the pawn shops have the readers? Are they required to scan something new? Because ultimately, that to me would take out a large part of their business.
We feel the same way about copper recycling. So the theft of copper should force all of the recyclers to have a look for our DNA before they accept any copper. There has been no such law passed. I think we need a little more time in implementation, but the police departments have been taught to probe the pawn shops, and they have the lights. And so they can point out, I'm sorry, you're in possession of stolen property, have to take this back.
So ultimately, with the pawn shop, so losing money because they're taking stuff back that was stolen, that will incentivize them to check the money.
Yep, from your mouth to God's ears.
Jim, you mentioned you have a hope or expectation that the polyester business will grow the fashion similar to cotton. So there's a possibility of more than 100 million tons of polyester this year. Translating that?
We were going so well till you said this year. And my lawyer is sitting right behind you, and he gave me the hairy eyeball. Yes, there is the opportunity for us to grow to 100 million pounds and more. It's a much bigger market than cotton. Precisely when that happens, I still don't give guidance. I don't know at this time, and I'm hoping it happens fast.
And is it a little, you have low strike lists for cotton, would that make it much easier to scale with cotton because you have low strike lists? They're not kind of in the same position as Techmer or Palmetto is. Am I correct?
Sort of, but we have no exclusivity with Techmer, or we're in a position to work with other plastic companies, and expect that we will do. The supply chains are a little more direct. Most often, the supply chain doesn't involve transit on the open ocean from country to country for polyester fibers. It's a little more compact geographically. which is why it's a little faster.
With respect to the synthetics, what's the major reason that the suppliers or the users of this would care? Like with cotton, you understand there's a quality difference. So the synthetics are not familiar with what they would, other than where it was manufactured or
Well, it's that. There's a big difference in quality of synthetics. For one thing, all you have to do is shop in Lululemon and you'll know right away. And there is a tremendous counterfeiting issue as well. If you just compare a company like Nike who has to deal with a huge counterfeiting burden, this is a way of demonstrating that the product is real. Any other questions?
On other question, I was deeply offended for you and for this company by the salacious attack against you personally and against this company. And the stock price obviously took a huge hit on that spurious report. And you did say that you were going to do something. Is there anything you can share with us, the stockholders and the lawyers here? Are we still pursuing some type of remedy for that horrible thing? And that these, whoever they are prosecuted for what I feel is not only the hurt to you, but to us, our shareholders?
Absolutely. It was the hurt to the shareholders, believe us, that affected all of us the day that happened. And for those of you who don't understand, what happened was there was a coordinated short effort. Several people in several locations built up a short position and then created a narrative some 68 pages long. And as our stock reached its peak, its pinnacle, and we were involved in important negotiations, which they seem to have known, they let loose this firebrand that was just loaded with lies and innuendo. And the response took minutes, hours, and we lost an enormous amount of shareholder value and progress that we had made as a company. We documented everything that happened in the moments up to that, and we provided that to the federal authorities. And as far as we know, the federal authorities are still pursuing it. And I really shouldn't say too much more.
So it's not a dead issue, and I apologize to you because of horrible things that people can do and thinking they have the freedom of journalism or whatever to just tell lies, and that should be against the law.
Yeah, it was as far from journalism. And while it was painful, believe me, the painful part was thinking about what it did to the people who were supporting us.